Hey, welcome back to Garbro's Field Desk. I have for you the next chapter of Emily Braun's Laments of Blood and Flesh. Remember that if you want to help support the channel, cause YouTube sure as hell ain't, be sure to stop by the Ko-fi, the Discord page, and Twitch where I stream. On the Ko-fi you can find patches, stickers, autographed signed books. If you want to try and find a if you want to try and find a copy of this book that's a little bit cheaper, you go on Amazon and find them. You can actually have them shipped right to your house. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Anyway, let's get to the chapter. Enough of me rambling like some kind of fucking idiot.
Chapter 7. Who Ensures the Hero? Emily groaned as she leaned up from her hotel bed, her body covered in so many bruises it hurt to even breathe. According to those who saw her explode out onto the street, Emily and the rest of her team had landed in a giant pool of sewer water that had done nothing to cushion their fall onto the shattered road top. Despite Emily's best hopes, the pipe that had been exposed through the pink, meat-covered ceiling of the Flesh Tailor's lair was not, in fact, a water pipe. It instead was an old sewer pipe, which had been laying under an even older natural gas line, and the combination of old sewer fumes and natural gas had caused an absolutely catastrophic explosion when the grenades had cooked off. They had been close enough to the surface that the shockwave burst through other natural gas lines, water pipes, and anything else the city of Las Vegas had decided to bury underground. This resulted in the road being split, a sinkhole ruining almost the entire intersection of Las Vegas Boulevard and Flamingo Road, and dozens of buildings getting damaged in one way or another. Emily placed her hands on her forehead, the torque around her neck so exhausted that all it could do was give her a little hum to let her know it was awake as well.
All those people. Davin.
Emily moaned into her wrists, but at this point, she was just too tired to cry over her miscalculation.
I just thought the fresh water would wash away their power and we could run.
When the road had exploded, being carried skyward by a roiling fireball being fed by both the alien explosives in the grenades and all the gas, chunks of asphalt and concrete had pummeled dozens of people to death, pounding them to hunks of meat onto the ground. Then there was all the fallen glass from the hotels and casinos. One person had even been bisected, falling left and right as a shattered window pane had sliced him right in two. When the grenades cooked off the gas and fed the explosion, the shockwave had ruptured dozens of water lines, and it had slammed into Emily and her team like the fist of a furious god. The room was flooded within seconds, and it took everything she could muster just to keep her head above water, even as the Flesh Tailor's creations drowned and everyone else struggled to tread water in the pounding waterfall. The water had been both a savior and a curse, hurling them all skyward through flaming propane lines and dragging them across broken pipework and earth. Marill had held her, she remembered that much, but that meant that the Centaurus had taken a lot of damage on the way up. But even then, it only partially spared Emily her own knocks and slams. Emily looked over towards the Centaur. Wrapped in so many bandages, she looked like an Egyptian mummy. But she snored heavily, gauze-wrapped hands still holding her whiskey bottle. Emily rubbed at her eyes as she thought back to Davin. The man had sustained over 30 stab wounds before the water came down, and he had bled out on the journey up. When they found him, he was still clutching the grenade rings in his fingers, his face still wearing a smug, satisfied smile, as if saying, "I won," despite having died during the Exodus. Bogart's body also arrived up top with him, though the ragdolling corpse had lost some of its right arm and left leg as it was dragged along the jagged rock and broken pipes. To be frank, Emily knew it was a miracle that most of them had made it to the top alive, and it was only thanks to the aid of the odd-looking Catwoman that Emily and the rest of her team hadn't bled out on the asphalt. Emily groaned and swung her legs over the side of her bed, her muscles so torn and fraught that every moment elicited a hiss of pain as she shuffled out of her room, looking out into the main living room of the large hotel suite. Dale and Katja were curled up together on the couch, Dale's face buried in Katja's collarbone as they slept, the taller woman snoozing happily with her nose in Dale's hair. Gale was asleep on the large reclining chair, her face still so heavily bandaged that only a single eye of hers was visible, along with her slashed nose so she could breathe. Humir was curled up on a ground pallet, hugging her knees as she slept. The elf had not coped well with the entire ordeal, and her lips still moved as she dreamed. Dexter, however, was not asleep at all, still sitting in the corner with a bottle of scotch in his hand, resting his head against the leather chair back. He didn't say anything to Emily when he saw her, but just raised the bottle towards her, his stitches still puffy and raw because he kept picking and scratching at them.
Where's Oscar?
Emily asked him, her voice raspy and coarse. Dexter nodded his head towards the bathroom door.
He's still in there. Pretty sure he's too afraid of getting up, and I may have to go in and rescue him.
I do not need rescue.
Oscar muttered out past the bathroom door.
Though he is correct. Standing up is going to be a bitch.
Emily knew it was funny, that she was supposed to laugh, but all she could manage was a small smile, mirth not quite able to build inside of her.
Still got it?
Dexter said to Emily, his voice as raw as hers due to all the substances that burned their esophagus lining. Emily pulled her braided ponytail around her shoulder so Dexter could see it, the simple silver loop braided into it so it couldn't be lost.
Still got it.
Dexter nodded, then brought the scotch bottle back to his lips. Emily was able to shuffle over and get some water down her throat before her phone rang, and she answered it with a grunt, still sipping the water down her bruised throat.
Emily?
Ogledock said, his voice tired. Emily grunted again as a trickle of water stemmed down her chin.
Everyone doing okay?
Ogledock asked her, and Emily could hear him shuffling papers. Emily hummed into her phone, grabbing another bottle of water and twisting off the cap. Ogledock hummed back at her, then sighed as he stopped shuffling papers.
Insurance is refusing to cover the property damage, and the city is demanding monetary compensation to repair all the destruction.
Emily chugged the entire bottle of water and set it down next to the empty one, working it down her throat and smacking her lips before she spoke.
Even though
They are grateful for us taking care of whatever it was that you stabbed in the chest. They had no idea he was that close to the surface, nor were they aware that he was the reason why people were disappearing.
Ogledock said in a rote and annoyed tone, clearly signaling to Emily that he was not happy with what he had been told by the city contacts.
Despite this, they still want compensation, as apparently only a few of the casinos and hotels had advanced enough insurance to cover...
Emily heard Ogledock shuffle a few more papers, then clear his throat.
Heroic interlude damages and coverages of fate-born duties. This means they'll take us to court if we don't come to an agreement.
Emily leaned down and set her forehead against the countertop, her hand clawing its way towards a third bottle of water.
Which means
we are going to be bled dry.
Ogledock said wearily, and Emily heard more papers shuffling.
All those funds that dragon brought you are going to barely cover it, and even then that's before we have to pay out the compensation for the people that got killed.
Emily grabbed the bottle, then slowly dragged it towards her.
which means...
Yes.
Ogledock said, the squeak from him leaning back in his chair coming in through the phone.
It's all going to be gone, and then some. The company is taking a major hit, and we may not be able to survive unless we all get in here and start making some money again. The payout from your defensive mile marker cola is helping, but it's still not enough.
Emily groaned as she leaned back up, her spine crackling angrily, and she grimaced.
So, despite me being the hero, saving the world, defeating an ancient murdering evil dude...
No one is helping. No.
Ogledock said dryly.
Nor are they giving you any breaks. You caused a sinkhole in the middle of Las Vegas and damaged a bunch of buildings owned by people who have their egos tied to them. They are thankful.
Emily sighed towards the ceiling, closing her eyes.
But they want their money.
But they want their money.
Ogledock confirmed, and Emily could tell by the sound he was spinning around in his chair.
But I'm the hero, Augie.
Emily whined into the phone, and she could feel herself becoming upset.
I fought the bad guy, and I lost people.
Ogledock didn't respond, but she just knew he was holding his head in his hand.
I know, Emily.
Ogledock said after a few moments, and he sounded just as disappointed as Emily.
I know. We lost Davin. We almost lost Tarj and Yoipa. You think they would cut us a break?
I'm the hero, Augie.
Emily mewed again, and this time the tears that had been threatening to well in her eyes came in force, trailing down her cheeks.
I'm the hero.
Ogledock opened his mouth to say something, closed it, then opened it again, the sounds only making Emily cry harder.
I'm sorry, Emily. I have to do this paperwork. I'll talk to you here in a bit.
Okay.
Emily said thickly as she wiped at her eyes, ending the call with her thumb and then tossing the phone onto the countertop with a clatter. Marill limped out of the room towards the kitchen, her legs hitching with every step.
No help with the insurance companies, I take it? They're taking it all.
Emily said weakly, unscrewing the top from the third water bottle.
We're gonna have nothing left from the assistance funds the dragon gave us, and Ogledock is having to pull all of our payment from the siege to help with things.
Marill frowned angrily, her ears flicking.
God damn it, why not? We went down there and fought some evil fucker that was chopping people up and making them into goons. Why is no one helping us? Because what we did wasn't covered in their insurance.
Emily said with a pitiful laugh, thumping her knuckles down on the countertop.
They didn't have hero coverage.
Marill growled in her throat, her tail swishing back and forth.
Do they not understand what this was all for? As soon as you did that bastard in, the water level started dropping. I don't think they do, Marill.
Emily said with an angry sigh, wiping at her eyes.
Who cares what happens to the world when some woman is breaking your profit margins?
Emily didn't resist when Marill walked around the counter and wrapped her up in a hug, and she laid her forehead against the centaur's breasts, fighting the urge to cry again. She failed, much to her frustration, and angry tears started pouring down her cheeks as her shoulders bucked and trembled. Marill hugged her for a good long while, not letting go of Emily until she had calmed down and stopped crying.
Better?
Marill asked Emily, using her thumbs to wipe away the tears on Emily's cheeks and brush away the hair stuck to her face. Emily sniffed, reaching over and grabbing the other water bottle.
No, that's fair.
Marill said, and gave Emily another short hug before turning towards the fridge. Dexter leaned towards the bathroom door, screwing the lid back onto his scotch.
Okay, now come out.
Oscar opened the door and leaned past the door frame, checking to make sure the coast was clear.
They all done?
They're all done.
Dexter affirmed, standing up to help Oscar towards a chair. Oscar nodded in thanks, hooking an arm over Dexter's neck.
They released your brother yet?
No. They're afraid he may be too contaminated. They're going to cremate him, test the ashes, then give them to me.
Oscar grimaced, both from the pain of sitting down in the chair and from knowing Dexter still couldn't get Bogart's remains, even though it had been 4 days since they had left the hospital.
I'm sorry, man.
It's aight.
Dexter murmured, then gave Oscar a pat on the shoulder. Oscar leaned back against the chair, groaning and hissing until he contorted himself into a position that only hit the 4th frowny face on the pain scale.
So, what's the plan now? We've been passed out for nearly 2 days and barely moving till this morning.
What plan?
Emily asked him, scooping up a banana and sitting down on the only couch that wasn't full of people. Oscar gestured around him.
After this, what's the plan?
We've been given a small gift in the form of the room contract being extended, as the body of Tavin was found and the clan who runs this place appreciated our efforts.
Emily sighed out, peeling the banana methodically.
After that, they want us out, because a lot of the other casino owners are pissed at us.
Oscar nodded.
Stands to reason.
No, it doesn't.
Marill barked, having made herself a dagwood from all the stuff in their fridge.
We shouldn't be getting treated like this at all. They're taking all of Emily's, hell, our money because their insurance won't cover the damages.
Gale furrowed her brow from all the noise, but woke up anyway, huffing out in aggravation.
Why the fuck are you yelling? This room is full of tired, hurt people, you know.
Sorry.
Marill grumped, taking an angry bite out of her sandwich and chewing as if it had insulted her during the creation. Gale turned her head as far as she could, leaning forward from where she was sitting.
What are we yelling about anyway?
Insurance companies.
Dale murmured from Katja's neck, and he shifted lower to rest his nose somewhere a bit softer.
Big, mean insurance companies.
Katja shifted as well, working her arm free so she could pet Dale's hair.
Everyone knows insurance companies are the root of all evil. Remember America's medical insurance racket?
Fae shenanigans.
Dale murmured again. Gale shook her head.
Nah, too evil for Fae. Besides, they only got here when the rifts did. That one is on us.
What a...
Humir screamed as she lurched awake, her eyes wide and hair hanging down around her face like a serial killer. Dexter snorted, making himself a sandwich along with Marill, who was already placing the top slice on her second dagwood.
Crazy is awake.
Do we need to give her another shot?
Katja said, leaning up away from Dale and reaching up towards her medical bag that was on a side table. Humir shook her head violently, her silver ear caps flashing.
No! No more shots. No more shots.
Katja looked down at the elf, judging her condition from where she lay, then shrugged and snuggled back down into the warmth of the sofa.
If she starts rolling her own shit or chewing on Emily, jab her with a blue needle.
Fuck that. I had to chase her down the hallway when she took off her clothes and tried to jump out a window.
Oscar said, using a stick to scratch the inside of his wrist cast.
Someone else can go jab the crazy elf.
Humir turned her head, snarling at Oscar.
I said I'm fine. I thought my clothes were covered in blood again. It's no big deal.
You broke my fucking wrist!
Oscar yelled at her, brandishing his scratching stick.
I survived all the way up without a single broken bone, and you break my wrist because we fell down that fucking staircase.
Emily exhaled out her nose, looking at Oscar and Humir, and they both settled, clearing their throats awkwardly.
Any other messages?
Emily asked the room, her stomach giving a soft growl as she smelled toasting bread and browning cheese from the kitchen. Marill licked some mustard from her thumb.
Taj and Yopua are awake. They've been transferred back home to rest.
They also transferred a lot of the bodies that floated up with us to where they belonged. No reward, though.
Dexter added, pulling his grilled ham and cheese out of the toaster oven. Gale scrolled through her phone as her other hand pulled some of her facial bandages off.
Water fell sharply over all of the coasts. Roughly 25 to 30 feet were gained back, and the assaults on the water purifier have withdrawn for a while since we came back up.
Elves are feeling better,
Humir said to the room as she scrolled through her own smartphone, tapping at the screen as she trolled through the message boards.
Everyone is feeling better, but there is still some pressure there.
Emily pulled her braid around, looking at the circlet she had braided into it for safekeeping.
All because we got this?
I'd reckon so.
Oscar said, groaning as he laid his casted wrist on the armrest.
That was the whole thing, right? Get the crown and everything goes back to normal? Also, can we meet this person, the one who sent you here?
Emily looked down at the simple silver crown, which to her looked more like a hoop or a circlet, and rubbed her thumb along the cool metal.
All because of this.
Gale ignored Emily, instead glaring at Oscar.
You want to meet the thing that sent Emily off on the suicide mission? You want them to also pat you on the head and tell you good job?
I mean, I wouldn't not like that.
Oscar said quietly, wiggling his only non-wounded foot on the leg rest.
Nothing wrong with an attaboy.
When are you guys heading back to your companies?
Emily asked the room, as this was something she had been wondering for a while. Dexter spoke first, chewing through a bite of his sandwich before speaking.
I'm going back as soon as I have my brother. I'll be burying him at our home and then retiring. I've had enough of this business, I think.
Emily nodded to him.
That is fair. Very fair. I'm sorry that Bogart didn't make it.
We knew what we were up against when we volunteered.
Dexter said with a nod back to her, turning his sandwich in his hand to gauge his next bite location.
Payout for us both from the siege as well as our insurance will set me up until I can get another job.
Dale rolled over and sat up, sighing out unhappily as his hair fell over his face, even though a lot of it had to be shaved off for his stitches.
We're heading back to ours here shortly, after we're able anyway. We've been gifted a bunch of money from the other divers in our company for a bit of a vacation.
Still cannot believe Darius made them all fork over $5,000 each.
Katja said with a gruff laugh, sitting up and leaning against Dale.
Though it will be nice not to work for a few months. Maybe this lout can finally get me pregnant.
Dale glowered as Dexter and Gale chuckled.
I've been doing my best, dear. Come on.
I wish to stay,
Humir said quietly, and everyone quickly looked to her. Marill raised a brow.
Fuck me, she might actually be cracked.
I am not cracked.
Humir growled at Marill, but turned to look at Emily as she arranged her hair back into place.
I shamed myself down there in the depths. I embarrassed myself and became a burden. You all made sure I came back out of there alive, and I owe a debt to Emily.
Emily frowned.
You don't owe me a debt, Humir. I never even implied it.
I have to keep working at your side to relieve myself of this shame.
Humir cried out, pulling her hair to her chest.
To prove myself worthy.
Marill limped up beside Emily, chewing through her fourth sandwich as she whispered.
Emily, careful now. Dolphin royalty takes this stuff kinda seriously.
Emily leaned in towards Marill, and the centauress leaned down to talk into Emily's ear.
If she thinks she's shamed herself, she may start to spiral and take her own life. It's kind of a thing they get roped into in order to clear their family's name after running away and becoming a diver. That's fine, Humir,
Emily said, trying to smile as kindly as she could at the elf, even though her brain was screaming.
You can stay with us if you like.
Humir calmed down immediately, quickly braiding her hair despite her bandaged hands.
I'm heading back,
Gale said, looking down at her phone.
My company took 4 casualties down at Kola, and Bossman is doing a recall. No exceptions.
Oscar looked over at Emily, shrugging.
I wouldn't mind hanging around. This would make one hell of an autobiography.
You're going to die, you moron,
Gale said as she glowered at Oscar.
It's a miracle you even survived this.
Oscar shrugged again, though he smiled.
Seems like a good omen to me. That is, of course, if Emily will have me.
I'll have to run this by the boss,
Emily murmured, pulling out her phone and texting to the best of her ability, even though her thumb joints hit her with pangs of pain so intense it made her hiss under her breath. Marill finished off her sandwich, dusting her hands off in front of her.
Not an awful idea, though. Oggledock has had a few people quit since we've been gone. Called you a bad omen. How nice.
Emily muttered under her breath as she sent the text. Marill cracked her neck as she spoke.
Jones is still there, though. Too stubborn to go anywhere else, even if he wanted to.
Jomasha with the skull face.
Dexter piped up, getting his own bottle of water. Marill nodded.
The very same.
Fuck, that guy is creepy.
Dexter said with a shiver, taking a swig of his water. Emily heard her phone alert chirp at her, and she looked down at it, opening up the message from Oggledock with her thumb.
We need them if we're gonna get back on our feet.
The message said, and Emily made an annoyed sound in her throat. She had hoped he would be his usual self and say no, though that did not appear to be the case at all this time.
Bossman says it's fine.
Emily said dourly, and Humir jumped to her feet.
I can come?
Humir yelled, then grimaced with a cry and fell back down to her knee as her leg muscles gave out. Oscar chuckled.
Good for showing, Humir. Attitude is at least in the right condition.
Oh, fuck off, human.
Humir growled, then pitifully cried out again as her hamstring locked up, and she fell onto her side with a whump of the ground bed.
Damn it all.
This should go swimmingly.
Marill murmured to Emily, and she shook her head, sighing to herself. True to their word, collectors came calling for their owe, and Ogledock had to relieve Emily of all of her funds. The large cache of jewels and coinage was quickly consumed by those who sought damages from Ogledock's recovery and survey, and after a court ruled that only half of those seeking had actual claims, the dues were paid. After Ogledock's insurance company took its own hit after arguing with dozens of other agencies, he then had to pay his deductible, which was the final lunging strike to the finances. The company came out intact, but heavily ravaged, and the coffers were hurting, having just enough to take care of Davin's death dues. To say that Ogledock was frayed to the quick would be an understatement, and the windfall that came from Gretchenk and Prapoli offering a free ride was just enough to keep him from the edge. Emily limped her way up the ramp of the Sea Dragon as the blades whirled overhead, thudding the air gamely as everyone else sat inside. Humir and Oscar tucked up to one side while Marill was busy tying down both the motorcycles, making sure Davin's was well secure. The morning before had been a sullen time as Emily hugged and wished those who were leaving farewell. Dexter had finally received Bogart's ashes and was on his way to spread them along the mountains, then looking to find a calmer, less death-inducing profession. Gale was well enough that most of her swelling had gone down, though her bruising was still substantial, enough that her face was a mess of purple and green. Her mood was high, though, and she hugged Emily, wishing her luck on her endeavors, and to
never call me for a job again.
Dale and Katja left after both thanked Emily for the adventure, the brush with death coming so close to reality that they wanted to focus on starting a family and turning towards office work for their company, leveraging off their story, or fighting alongside Emily to boost their own company's prowess. Humir waved to Emily, her silver ear caps glinting in the sunlight that came in through the windows, while Oscar was busily fussing with the tie-down on Emily's Zindap, pulling on the ratchet strap with a curse.
Well, if it isn't Emily Bronze.
Gretchenk called out to Emily, stepping back from the cockpit and flashing her with that same feral grin that Emily had seen while she was behind the joystick. The Gorgon's copperhead snake hair all looked at Emily with recognition, and a few were even smiling through their forked tongues.
I thought she'd be too afraid to fly with us again.
Emily smiled back and reached out to grasp Gretchenk's hand, shouting over the noise of the engine.
I've had far worse.
So I heard. Maybe this will be less eventful than our last flight.
Gretchenk shouted back, her smile flashing brightly in contrast with her dark freckles, and she went back towards the cockpit, whirling her fingers in the air.
Ramp up.
Ramp up, ramp up.
Marill muttered to herself as she jogged towards the rear ramp, slapping the button with her palm and holding it as the ramp began to whir and raise. Emily walked past the motorcycles and made her way towards the cockpit, pulling down a jump seat. She watched the Gorgons flicking through their switches and pre-flight check, and one of the snaky tendrils turned its head, recognizing Emily and opening its mouth into a grin.
Yes, she's still alive.
Prapoli said aloud to the snaky tendril, reaching up and turning its head back towards its duties.
We can talk to her later.
Emily grinned, giving the snaky tendril a little wave before it turned and went back to watching its augmented gauges.
Throttle up,
Gretchenk said into her mic. Emily heard the massive blades above her speed up, thudding the air with vigor.
RPMs are up, and we are Gucci. Pull a collective.
Prapoli said with a smile, pulling back on the collective arm. The massive helicopter lifted into the air with only a slight lurch to Emily's stomach, and she looked out the front window.
Big snake tutu to the whiny little babies in Las Vegas air control?
Gretchen chirped into her mic, and Emily quickly pulled her own headset on, catching only the last bit of the retort.
And getting mad you buzzed the tower does not make us babies.
The man said, his voice already exasperated, knowing who he was talking to.
We're leaving.
Gretchen said, completely forgoing the usual radio chatter protocol. A woman piped up from the control tower radio.
And don't come back.
Both of the Gorgons hissed with laughter, then turned, gaining speed as they banked around Las Vegas proper.
Now that's a hole,
Prappily said as she looked out the side window, and Emily frowned, knowing what they were looking at.
Let's hope the thing I left down there stays down there.
Emily murmured into the mic, and to her surprise, both of the Gorgons nodded in agreement.
Nasty thing,
Prappily said. Gretchen agreed.
Shouldn't even be here.
Emily turned to look out the window and down at the hole. Still the rough pockmark in the middle of the intersection. They weren't moving quickly on filling it back up as scientists and oculotechs were still rooting around down in the chamber, studying the massive room as well as trying to figure out where the flesh tailor went.
Is it true they haven't found him?
Emily asked into the mic, the sounds of rushing water and screams trying to fill her ears. Gretchen nodded.
No sign of him as of yet. They've been looking, though.
Bastard be running,
Prappily said, wrinkling her nose as she squinted one of her amber eyes.
You shoot him down to the depths, he's gonna be running to lick its wounds.
Gretchen gave Prappily a side eye, still watching their flight path through the corner of her vision.
You sure about that, sister? We still do not know how they think.
It's what I would do,
Prappily said with a shrug, reaching up and giving one of her snaky hair tendrils a scritch.
Homeboy thought he was in control. Then some little human girl slits him from clavic to dick.
Gretchen furrowed her brows, then turned around in her seat, gesturing for Prappily to take the controls. Emily looked at the Gorgon, her hazel honey eyes looking over her aviators into Emily's face. Gretchen still looked ever the predator, and she ran her tongue along her poisonous fangs as she thought. It gave Emily the creeps, though it did give a curious offset to the Gorgon's tomboyish charm and complexion, and Emily still wished she had Gretchen's dark freckles instead of her own.
Is that what happened, Emily Bronze?
Gretchen asked as one of her snaky tendrils came down and moved her aviator sunglasses further down her nose, giving her more of a mysterious air.
You somehow did harm to a creature of the shadows? This is impossible, you know. No one has managed to even hurt one until now, only their cultists.
Prappily sniffed.
I've said so, for arms. I've been popping, thanks to Humir.
It is,
Emily said, her green eyes staring into Gretchen's honeyed hazel ones.
Something fell into place after he touched me. I'm not sure what it was.
Gretchen stared at Emily for a long time, as did all of her snaky hair tendrils who looked from each other to Emily with worried eyes. This stare was unlike the others. This stare was the stare of a predator, looking at another predator, and knowing that it was far more dangerous than itself. Emily realized quickly that Gretchen was staring at her with fear, like a house cat coming across a jaguar.
If that is true,
Gretchen said, and Emily saw the Gorgon become more guarded, her muscles coiling as if bracing for attack.
That means you are the most dangerous cargo we've yet to transport, Emily Bronze.
Despite the short amount of time that had passed, Emily felt as if she was returning to an old home after years away at war. When the Sea Dragon touched down at the airport, she didn't feel the soft wave of relief that should have come, but only a hollow ache in her stomach. Usually, there was a subtle joy of coming home after a long time away. You felt happy to see the same old door, sleep in a bed that was well warmed by your back, the familiarity of a toilet not sat upon by hundreds of strangers you never knew. But she felt none of it, just exhaustion. When the bikes were parked, Emily looked up at the sign of Ogledoc's Recovery and Survey as if she hadn't seen it for years. She felt tired, as if too much of her had been used up in the short few days that she had been underground. Somehow a week felt like a year.
I'm gonna get all of our gear unloaded.
Marill said, hefting 2 of their large packs under her arms.
You guys go ahead and get inside. I'm sure Humir and Oscar are gonna need rooms.
Humir brightened at the prospect.
Can I get a room next to Emily?
No.
Marill spat, pinning her ears back.
Crazy goes at the end of the hall, near the fire extinguishers.
Oscar just chuckled, pulling his own rucksack onto his shoulders.
I'm sure any room will do.
Emily slipped past the front door and walked down the familiar hallway, but stepped past her room, instead looking around at all the other doors.
They've all left.
Emily breathed out to herself, seeing that every door besides her, Tarj, Yoipua, Jomesha, and Marill was missing a name.
They all actually left.
Yes.
A familiar, mechanical drone of a voice said, and Emily turned to see Jomesha stride into view, holding what looked like some kind of data slate.
Everyone but us chosen few have departed.
Emily was happy to see the metal, skull-headed man, despite what his general appearance would allow.
Jomesha.
Hello, hero.
Jomesha said gently, holding out his plated armor arms for her. Emily fell into them, which she regretted when her temple smacked into the armor plating of his chest, and she grunted out in pain.
Jeez, need to stuff a pillow in there or something.
Ruins the effect, I'm afraid.
Jomesha said, hissing out in his usual tone of laughter.
Taj and Yoipa are at the hospital still. They won't be fit to come back for a few more days.
Emily leaned away from Jomesha, looking up at the big metal man.
Why did the rest of the divers leave?
They believe you are jinxed,
Jomesha said, somehow forming his mouth into an angry line despite the lack of his lips.
Though personally, I believe they are cowards. I see you have brought us replacements, which is some news I can stand to bear.
Jomesha gazed over the top of Emily's head to the frozen forms of Humir and Oscar, both of them locked in place in the hallway.
Is it me, or is that man made entirely out of metal?
Oscar said quietly to Humir. Humir's purple-red eyes were wide, and she flexed her fingers warily.
His head is a skull. Is he dead? Some form of techno-necromancy?
Afraid not, my dear.
Jomesha said loudly enough so his words echoed down the hallway.
I am as alive as my hearing is sharp.
Oops.
Oscar snorted, while Humir paled. Emily gave the big metal man a smack on the arm with an open hand.
Be nice to them. They helped me keep alive down under Vegas.
Yes, I've gotten word of what happened. Show me the blade,
Jomesha said, holding out his metal hand while the other's fingers began to open up into tools. Emily pulled the tiger talon from its sheath on her belt and gave it to Jomesha. Humir and Oscar coming up near Emily, but standing warily to the side. Jomesha flourished his finger tools, more to scare Humir than to any other effect, and the elf ducked quickly behind Oscar in order to use him as a shield. Humir flinched when she saw Jomesha could also smile somehow, despite the lack of lips. Mostly in his eyes, but he let his scanner go to work, coursing it up and down both the handle and blade of the alien weapon. Jomesha hummed electronically in his throat as his eyes flicked through multiple colors, scanning the weapon visually through the spectrums, before his eyes returned to their normal blue hue.
Regular blade, but not. Formed of multiple alloys and a few other choice ingredients I cannot identify. It also has a weird aspect to it that makes it glow under the Juman spectrum, which usually means it has spent some time in between worlds,
Jomesha said, turning the blade from side to side in his hand. Humir poked her head around Oscar, who seemed fine with being a human shield, for now.
Spent time between worlds? What does that mean? I thought there were only the planes and nothing else. How can one be in between them?
It has been in a region we call the Elitamar, the space in between. When our ships would travel, we would form a little slit in this space with an Elita drive and pass through it, coming out on the other side within seconds.
Jomesha said, nodding towards Humir.
It was very fast and very accurate. However, within this space, time would continue onward at a normal pace. You could spend almost a year in Elitamar space, then come out on the other side with only a few seconds having passed in real time.
Oscar raised an eyebrow.
What if someone was born in this space in between? Did they run into the problem that humans did when calculating leap years?
Then they would only be a few seconds old in real space.
Jomesha said with a shrug.
But maybe a year old in Elitamar. Those who traveled aboard ships had to keep 2 calendars and had 2 ages as well.
Sounds like a lot of paperwork, Chrome Dome.
Emily said with a snort. Ben looked around Jomesha's chest.
Ogledockin?
Jomesha jerked his metallic skull of a head backwards.
In the office. Jane won't be in for another hour or so, but I can get started on rooms for these 2.
Can we wait for this Jane instead?
Humir said, still hiding behind Oscar.
No.
Jomesha said, then turned on his heel, gesturing for the 2 to follow. Emily moved around them as Marill bustled in through the side door, arms laden with rucksacks and gear, and she gave the centauress a pat on the flanks as she slid by. Ogledock was leaning back in his chair, a cold mask on his face, and Emily had seen the changeling in better shape. Despite the lack of actual bruising and damage, it looked like Ogledock had been through the emotional ringer until there was nothing left. His office was a sea of paperwork laid out in some form of a logical pattern, but to Emily, it just looked like a mess. Emily knocked on the glass door, in which Ogledock didn't move or react to at all. Emily knocked again, and Ogledock still made a very evident effort to not react or notice that knock, despite the fact his ears twitched in acknowledgement to the sound. Seeing the game being played, Emily pulled up both fists and began to rapidly knock on the glass, drumming on it like a dull snare drum. Ogledock slowly pulled the gel-cold mask off of his face with a slow drag. His eyebrows so close together they nearly formed a uniform line.
Yes?
Mr. Ogledock? Oh, Mr. Ogledock, please let me in.
Emily said as she pushed open the door a crack, just enough so she could poke her head inside. Ogledock's lips split in a wry grin, and Emily knew she had won.
The prodigal hero returns.
Ogledock said, pulling the gel mask back onto his eyes. Emily slipped in past the door and sat down in one of the chairs in front of Ogledock's desk, slumping into it with a whoomph of fabric and filling.
Why do you need a cooling mask? Can't you changelings just make your face unpuffy?
Emily asked, the familiar sense of blood and cinnamon filling her nose the more Ogledock spoke.
While we are capable of incredible things, we changelings have yet to master facial swelling around the eyes from stress.
Ogledock said, leaning back in his chair.
Those 2 fish come with you?
Emily nodded.
Yeah, Humir the Elven Princess. And Oscar, who is neither.
I can relate to Oscar in that way. Good to see.
Ogledock said dryly, reaching out blindly and dancing his fingers along the desk until he found the page he wanted.
Tarj and Yoipa will be good to go here soon. Then we'll have you, Jomesha, Marill, and these other 2 you dragged along. Everyone else is either dead or fled.
Emily's lips pressed into a line.
I don't understand why they would leave.
Cowardice.
Ogledock growled, leaning up his chair and pulling off his mask.
Afraid of getting the same treatment Tom and the others did, or getting roped up into helping you. A bunch of grown men getting outshined by some renegade elven princess. Fucking shame.
Emily nodded her head to the side.
Ain't gotta remind me. I was there. How bad are our coffers?
I feel like the Spanish after a handful of wars with the British.
Ogledock said with a short sigh, handing the paper to Emily.
We have enough to manage operating costs for 5 months. After that, we're hosed. Jamesha can't go out on a dive because I need him here working on our vehicles. That leaves you and the others.
Emily looked down at the paper and her heart sank. She had been well in place to be the richest diver alive, but the damages were so much that she had been rendered nearly penniless.
They took me for everything I was worth, despite what I did.
Emily murmured, running her hand down her braid until her hand came against the silver loop. Ogledock nodded.
Appears that way. When are you going to deliver the hoop?
When she comes for it.
Emily muttered, still looking down at the paper.
How did Cowshank's casino nail us for $1 million? They weren't even near us.
Ogledock clicked at a few things on his display.
Shockwave damage had bursted a bunch of pipes in their basement, and it damaged a lot of their electrical systems, causing a few of their customers to become locked into their gambling matrix. Then they had to hire some technomancers to get their souls out.
They shouldn't even be gambling in virtual reality. That's stupid to begin with.
Emily said derisively, tossing the paper back onto the desk and sighing as she laid back in the chair. A shuddering squeaking of springs made Emily turn her head, and she saw Marill collapse into the couch, pulling the familiar smells of the blankets and woobies around her and instantly falling back to sleep. Only half of her horsey lower body even on the couch.
Everyone's a little tired,
Emily said with a smile, but Ogledock rubbed at his nose with pinched fingers.
I know that, but there's nothing I can do. We need to get moving as fast as possible to get money flowing back into our wallets. A fair chunk of land has come back to us, which can prove lucrative.
Ogledock said, turning to his screen so Emily could see. Emily groaned but leaned up off the chair, settling against the desk edge.
How long can you give us?
As soon as that creepy beast has her hoop, I need you back out in the field.
Ogledock said, then gestured towards his screen.
Shadow creatures are still up to their normal game, and if anything, have ramped up their hunting and theft. Not to mention, with the recent crack storms, we're finding more valuable tech than we used to.
Emily raised up her hand, gesturing towards the screen.
Looks like there's been more tech fall at the lower ends of the Rockies, and a fair portion of Texas and Oklahoma came back to us. Wasn't there a little war there some time ago?
The clash between Sandhigh and Lorhan, yeah. They came through the splits in their planes and just immediately fought each other, spilling out of the tears and right into the battlefield.
Ogledock said with a nod.
Looks like the flood is going to recede and possibly reveal all kinds of strange and wonderful things,
Emily murmured, then pointing to a giant blue circle that was hovering over eastern Washington, the middle of Texas, and northern Louisiana.
What's going on here? Some kind of new hotspot?
Ogledock shook his head.
Nah, these are now open fronts. The cultists are trying to hold on to their ground, but there are those who want their lands back. The circle in Washington is actually being funded by some elven coalition to take and secure the rainforests from raids. They like it there, reminds them of home.
Money to be made.
Emily breathed out, though to be honest, she felt like she could sleep for another 2 weeks and still be tired.
How long can you really give us, Augie? We can't move in a single group anymore. We gotta spread out and hit as many areas as we can.
Ogledock leaned back in his chair and tapped his fingers on his armrest, blowing air past his lips as he thought.
A week, I think. After that, we need to account for travel and hunting time.
Ogledock said after a long pause, and Emily nodded.
I'll take it. What are your plans?
Emily asked.
Don't want to send you out in single teams, but likely pairs, if not threes. Marill, Tarj, and Yoipa will head to the old battlefield to see what kind of tech they can scoop, while I'm sending you out into the Rockies with Humir and Oscar. You can assess their worth while you're there and see if they're worthy of our company.
Emily felt an odd pang in her chest.
You're sending me without Marill?
I know it may feel strange at first. You two have been attached at the flank nearly since you got here, but I can't have you constantly out there in a duo. Familiarity breeds complacency, which nearly always leads to death.
Ogledock said. Emily didn't like that it made sense, and hated that she would be out in the field without her trusted friend for a few weeks. To make matters worse, Marill would be outside her scope of help if the need arose, and that kept making Emily's heart pang with anxiety.
What if I traded Oscar for Marill?
Emily asked, turning to look over her shoulder at Marill laying on the couch.
Emily,
Ogledock began, but Emily leaned against the desk.
You can't put me out there with two fucking randoms who went on a suicide mission with me. Humir is a basket case, but Oscar is fine. He'll be more than helpful to Tarj and Yopua.
Emily said gruffly, pointing a finger at Ogledock.
Familiarity may breed compliancy, but not knowing if some schmuck has your back in a tight spot can lead anyone to an early grave. Marill has always had my back, so I want her watching it.
Ogledock leaned up his chair, raising an eyebrow.
Aren't you kind of poor to be making demands? Last I checked, all your spending power left the moment you came out of that hole.
Ogledock, please.
Emily whined, thumping her forehead onto the paper-covered desktop.
I can't handle both Humir and Oscar on my own for who knows how long. Just give me the horsewoman.
Ogledock rolled his eyes, throwing up his hands.
Fine, fine. Woe upon ye if Tarj finds some heavy-ass tech they needed Marill to haul away.
They'll live,
Emily said triumphantly, then slumped.
I want a nap.
Then go get a nap, you giant baby.
Ogledock growled, shooing his hands at her.
Before you make more demands and ruin my deployment plans any further.
Emily left the office, saw that Oscar and Humir were already passed out asleep in the reclining chairs, and that Jomesha was back outside doing maintenance on their motorcycles. With no one to talk to, and Jane still not arrived, Emily looked to the couch. She kicked off her boots, crawled up beside Marill, and was asleep before her hair had even settled against the pillow. Emily woke up before any of the others did, having slept a comfortable 3 hours, and there was still plenty of light in the sky. Jane was in her office, but appeared to be extremely busy, so Emily shot her a wave that was returned with hastened courtesy. Emily went out the back door to see Jomesha and found the big metal man undenting Davin's motorcycle, the impressive set of maglocks arranged around him as he worked. She found a comfortable seat on an old, rickety lawn chair and patiently waited for the metal man to acknowledge her presence. Jomesha was so deep into his work that Emily had nearly nodded off again when she heard her name, and she bobbed her head up, blinking her eyes rapidly. Emily hummed, rubbing at her eyes with her palms as the odd hissing laughter of Jomesha filled her ears.
I asked how you were doing, Emily.
Jomesha repeated, setting his magnetic tools back into their specialized container. Emily yawned and bowed her back in a stretch, grunting out ruefully as her spine crackled.
I've been better.
I can see that,
Jomesha said, his eyes going through the color spectrum as he scanned her. Emily shrank up into her chair, which squeaked alarmingly, and she held her hands out in front of her.
Oh, for God's sakes, Jomesha. Don't scam me with me knowing about it. Who knows what all you can see?
Everything, of course. Nothing really escapes my scanners.
Jomesha said matter-of-factly, and Emily blanched.
I even know that elf is royalty, and from a very old magical lineage as well. She's had 2 failed pregnancies, has broken her arm before, and may be prone to overindulging on what I believe are green olives.
Emily sat there in stunned silence as Jomesha continued.
This Oscar fellow has been to South America, Europe, and Africa. Has 7 old bullet wounds with 1 still stuck in his body, and at one point may have coupled with both a male and female Sheshka.
How the hell would you even know that?
Emily cried out in both alarm and astonishment, slamming her hands down on the arms of the lawn chair.
Sheshka leave micro scratches on the skin due to the little barbs in their hair. Not that I blame him. Sheshka are prone to coating their long hair in pheromones, which can enter the skin if their hair touches you.
Jomesha said matter-of-factly, leaning over and observing the Zundat. Emily remembered the Sheshka coming in on a very brief split, with only maybe 100 or so of their kind coming through before the split snapped shut again. They were an attractive race that were fine-boned, as if they were purely created from lithe gymnasts, though their eyes were horizontally slitted and had teeth that made Emily's skin crawl. Worse was their hair.
They had long, vibrantly colored hair that seemed to move on its own, even in a still room with no breeze, and the strands were littered with little micro hooks that behave like Velcro. As the story went, Sheshkas had extreme hardships when breeding with other Sheshka, but their genes were so strong and alien, it overrides the genes of any other race that they came into contact with. This led Sheshkas to prey upon other races in order to reproduce, as a pure Sheshka was just too hard to manage. Naturally, the beings who saw the massive fangs and crushing molars of a Sheshka didn't want them anywhere near their face or body, but the pheromone-laden hooks in their hair made all those troublesome reservations melt away. Getting their hooks in ya meant a totally other thing when it came to Sheshkas, and it was only thanks to their 2-year gestation period that they weren't taking over the corner of the universe they happened to slip in from. Emily decided that she didn't want to know what Jomesha knew about her, and placed an order of ammunition with the big metal man before borrowing one of the runner trucks and heading out to see Tarj and Yoipua at the hospital. It wasn't a long drive, but it seemed that traffic was always on a steady increase in Logan. The buzz of all the new sites opening up was causing more foot traffic as well, which was really booming along the smaller businesses that catered to the divers. Emily worked her way through the hospital and found Tarj first, the half-orc halfway through slurping down a cup of jello when she rounded through the open door.
"Hey there, hero,"
Tarj said with a laugh, setting down his jello as he leaned to the side.
"Yoipa, Emily is here."
Emily heard a loud bang, a crash, one of the nurses yell out a rather colorful profanity, then the telltale clicking of Yoipua dashing along the tile floor of the hospital. Emily had enough time to turn and brace herself as the harpy slammed into her, Yoipua screeching out in elated harpish as Emily swung her around.
"Emily! Emily, back!"
Yoipua cried out happily, giggling as Emily swung her to a stop.
"Yoipua, your claws!"
Emily cried out, almost falling to her knees from the harpy digging her wing claws into her jacket and flesh. Yoipua, however, had no intention of letting Emily go, let alone releasing the pressure she was applying to her wing claws as she cried out.
"Emily! Emily's here! Tarj! Emily is here! Look!"
"Emily, did you know you were here?"
Tarj asked dryly, picking his jello cup back up. Emily hugged the harpy close, more to alleviate the weight on the ends of her wing claws than anything else.
"Yes, Yoipua, I'm here. And now I'm bleeding likely."
"Don't be baby. Yoipua was bleeding too, and Yoipua not complaining."
Yoipua chided with a giggle, releasing Emily and coming to the ground with a click of her talons. Tarj raised an eyebrow as he ran his spoon along the side of his jello cup.
"You've done nothing but whine, complain, and moan since you got here."
"They have not let Yoipua out for days. Days. Nothing but running exercise tread and lifting weights all day."
Yoipua sulked, kicking her single-taloned avian foot on the tile, the other a simple spring prosthetic. Emily did notice that the harpy was much heavier than usual, and now that she looked closer, Yoipua had much larger leg and arm muscles.
"Have you been working out?"
Emily asked Yoipua, tilting her head and then flicking her eyes to Tarj. Yoipua grinned for a moment, but it didn't last long as sadness settled into her eyes.
"Yoipua cannot fly."
Tarj looked up at Emily as he spooned the vibrant red jello into his mouth, and his eyes told her to use caution.
"You can't fly anymore?"
Emily asked softly, cupping her hands to Yoipua's cheeks and running her thumbs under the harpy's eyes. Yoipua nodded as she sniffed, her eyes fighting to not fill with tears in front of Emily.
"Wings can no longer bear weight of Yoipua. Bones were too broken, body too broken."
"She's been working on her arm and leg strength,"
Tarj said matter-of-factly, setting his empty cup on a nearby tray.
"She's gotten quite fast on that little spring. Can hit the same speed as sprinters."
"Yoipua was queen of skies,"
Yoipua said fiercely, and Emily noticed a determined edge to her voice.
If Yoipa can no longer rule skies, then Yoipa master the ground.
Emily turned to Targe.
How about you? You getting along well?
Well enough.
Targe murmured, itching at his stomach.
Had to lose a bit of my insides, but all the important bits are still working. Gonna get some nice battle scars from it, so it's a plus.
Emily smiled in relief, then turned to Yoipua.
How is the new leg treating you?
Heavy.
Yoipua said grumpily, pulling over a stool and undoing her buckles.
Yoipa have to wear special sock. Hope your Mesha can make something better.
Emily's heart panged when Yoipua pulled the spring leg away, finally breaking the illusion. Her leg was as short as she remembered it, sliced away by the wreckage of the wall during the explosion. The doctors had tidied it up and it looked healthy enough, but even then, Emily's mind kept feeding her flashes of digging Yoipua up from the pile of bodies. How ashen pale her flesh was.
Sure Jomshua can whip you up something.
Emily said with a nod, then held open her arms to Yoipua. Yoipua didn't even bother with her spring prosthetic, just launching herself with her good leg and driving herself into Emily's arms. Emily didn't mean to start crying as she held Yoipua, but the thought of the harpy not even being able to fly, losing her leg, it just hit her in all the wrong spots and she couldn't bear the weight. She sank down to her knees as she held Yoipua, their foreheads pressed together and hands clutching. Yoipua started crying as well as she clutched Emily. While Emily thought it was over, the grief of her leg and wings, Yoipua was actually crying out of relief and thanks, having been pulled from the brink of death by Emily's resolve and adherence to their friendship. Emily heard the rustle of bed sheets behind her, and Targe's light green arms wrapped around the both of them, the tall half-orc coming down onto a knee. Targe rested his head on Emily's shoulder, hugging her and Yoipua tightly as he murmured into Emily's ear.
Thank you for saving Yoipa.
Everyone say Yoipa should be dead.
Yoipua mewled, sniffing wetly as she buried her head in Emily's chest.
Yoipa would be dead if not for Emily.
Targe nodded.
I can't think of anyone who would threaten to shoot a surgeon and then kidnap a medic in order to save their friends.
Looks like you need better friends,
Emily said with a tearful laugh, and both Targe and Yoipua laughed with her. She spent a little more time at the hospital before both Targe and Yoipua tired, the two retiring back to their rooms. Emily left the hospital a little wet around the eyes still, but in higher spirits than when she went in. She still wasn't ready to head home just yet, and she turned onto the same street the store where the old man was. Emily had a desire to get some questions asked, to find out just what the fuck was going on, but the closed sign in the window told her to piss off with those questions. Agitated, she turned the truck around in the small parking lot and made her way instead to Calamity Mame's, the little diner a home away from home. The familiarity of the cowhide booths and the smell of brewing coffee was instantly comforting, and when everyone realized who had walked in through the door, the mood changed. Emily was shocked that a piano player hadn't stopped playing, or a record scratch being played through the speakers in the ceiling.
I'll be fucked,
a man said, turning in his chair to look at Emily.
It really is her.
A female diver stood up from her booth, spitting a bite of sandwich out of her mouth onto the plate.
Oh, hell no, I ain't being in the same room as Emily. She's fucking jinxed.
Sit down, you dumb bitch,
Olivia said, turning in her chair to level her eyes at the female diver. She had overalls off at the shoulders, the sleeves tied around her waist, and her formidable upper arms were bare to the eye thanks to her black tank top.
And if you speak ill of Emily again, I'll grind your ass into oil for my engines.
The female diver was taken aback, and even faltered a single step rearward.
But she—
Sit down!
Olivia roared, ripping herself skyward so fiercely that her chair tumbled and clattered to the ground on its side.
Down, you daft cunt, before I rearrange the fucking face of yours.
Emily blinked in surprise as everyone else shrank away from Olivia, her huge arm and leg muscles bulging as she flexed them in preparation for a fight. The female diver fell more than sat, back down onto the booth, her mouth parted in shock as she stared wide-eyed at Olivia.
Any other of you dickless fucks got a problem with Emily, eh?
Olivia bawled, curling her huge hands into fists as large as hammers.
Any of you fop-headed maggots want to step outside with me and make your opinions heard?
The room was deathly silent, with only the sound of the kitchen being heard over the ticking of heartbeats, and those in the dining room slowly turned back to their plates. Others slapped down a lot of cash to cover the bill and vacated in a hurry out the to-go door, not making eye contact with the still standing bulk of Olivia.
Olivia, your soup is gonna get cold.
Emily murmured as she stepped into the dining room, the hoop on the end of her hair braid swinging jauntily. Olivia snorted, leaning down to right her chair and then sitting back down in it.
I'll have my knuckle skin on hot oil fins before I'll let anyone badmouth the woman who found my fiancé.
Excuse me?
Emily said in surprise, stopping mid-step of her foot.
Your fiancé?
Olivia rustled around in the pockets of her work overalls, working her hands around the tied sleeves until she was able to ferret out her phone.
Yep, he had been missing for quite some time now, and we all thought he had been murdered by the cultists. Either that or he got free and slipped through a tear.
When Olivia clicked the button on the side of her phone, she quickly sped her finger around the lock pattern and opened the pictures of her fiancé.
This is him. His body came out of the same hole you did,
Olivia said, smiling up at Emily in gratification.
We were able to put him to rest a few days ago.
Emily swallowed hard, her mouth going dry. She recognized the man and had been seeing him in her dreams every night since Las Vegas. She knew his kind face, his wide shoulders, the ruddy beard, and tidy short hair. He was one of the men who had stabbed Davin to death just before the water fell.
I'm glad he was able to finally come home,
Emily said, having to force the words through her dry throat. Now that she looked, Olivia was gazing down at her phone with a softness that Emily had not observed before, her thumb slowly sliding across the screen as she stared at his face. Olivia sniffed roughly, then gestured towards the other chair on the other side of the table.
Would you like to have lunch with me? I'll buy. It's the least I can do. Plus, I know the insurance company's cleaned you out.
Know about that, eh?
Emily murmured, pulling out the chair and sitting down heavily, pulling her hair braid around to lay on her chest. Olivia nodded.
There's been a run-in tally on a few of the forums as the numbers are slowly leaked. You were pretty rich for all that was worth, Annie. Wait, is that?
Olivia whispered, leaning forward over her bowl of soup to stare wide-eyed at the silver hoop at the end of Emily's braid.
Is that it? Is that the crown?
Emily opened her menu, still trying to get whatever saliva she could down her throat.
Mm-hmm.
Wow,
Olivia said breathlessly, her eyes coursing along the simple silver circlet.
And it was inside him?
Emily kept her half-lidded eyes stuck to the menu.
Uh-huh.
Wow,
Olivia said again in a hushed tone, trying to find her spoon on the tabletop.
That's so rad.
Emily felt compelled to snort out her nose, but held herself in check.
Well, hi there, Emily.
Tootie called out as she stepped out of the kitchen. She was still rockabilly as ever, though she seemed to be weaving more punk aspects into her outfit.
New boots and pants,
Emily asked Tootie with a smile, leaning back in her chair to look around at the elf.
Vintage, vintage, you know it.
Tootie said proudly, slowly turning to show off the ERDL battle dress uniform bottoms and a pair of black jump boots that matched her chosen dark lip color of the day.
Fresh off the factory a la 1979.
Plain slicing thieves,
Olivia grumbled, gathering some soup on her spoon. Tootie lifted her nose, clearing her throat as she stared down at Olivia.
The plain tears are open for a very limited time, and they pay their fair share.
Right. Is that before or after they steal their fair share first?
Olivia murmured, popping her spoon into her mouth and fixing Tootie with the glare.
I think I'll have junk food today, Tootie.
Emily chirped up, maybe a bit loudly, in order to jerk attention away from the tension rapidly building between the human and the elf.
Mozzarella sticks, garlic bread, chicken wings?
Tootie snapped her gaze to Emily, fixing her with a sharp smile and leaning down to give her a hug. Emily laughed while hugging Tootie back, but saw Olivia mouthing at her and pointing down towards her soup.
Oh, and a bowl of soup. Whatever Olivia was having.
Emily said with another laugh.
Her soup went cold, huh?
Tootie giggled, giving Emily another squeeze and a fat kiss on the cheek, leaving a large black lip mark.
I'll bring you some water, too. Be back in a bit.
Olivia chuckled, pushing her cold bowl of soup away.
For a pauper, you sure are getting the hero's treatment.
Emily angrily smirked a corner of her mouth.
Oh yeah, for sure. Nothing beats coming home a penniless hero.
Olivia chuckled, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. The junk food did a lot to improve Emily's mood further, and no one can be angry while eating fried cheese and bread covered in more garlic and butter than what is really needed. Emily made small talk with Olivia and Tootie for around an hour, saw the sun was dipping low in the sky, and knew that her bed was calling for her. True to Tootie's word, her meal was paid for by the restaurant, and she left waving goodbye, getting back into Jomesha's truck. When she parked it in the vehicle garage, she closed the doors and stood in the middle of the quiet motor pool, looking up at the darkening sky and sighing out. Everything was going to be the same, but just different enough to bother her. Just different enough to remind her every day that she had caused the deaths of people and had been the savior to others. Oddly, her mind found itself resting on the large man that she had left behind in the tunnel, then reached down, touching the blade with her fingers and running them along the sheath. Emily supposed that, in a way, she was carrying some people with her as well. She wondered what had happened to the large man's body, but was startled when the Torque spoke up in her mind.
Someone is waiting by the door in the shadows.
Emily turned her head and stared into the shadows, and was just able to make out a form laying within. She had just placed her hand on the grip of her CZ-75 when the shadow moved, uncoiling and moving out into the fading light of dusk.
Wait, it's me, I'm sorry.
Mela stammered, holding up his hands and eyes wide with fright. Emily blew out her lips in a stuttered raspberry and leaned back, hands on her hips.
Jesus Christ, Mela. Do you have any idea where I just came from?
I know, I'm sorry. It just looked like you were having a moment, and I didn't want to ruin it.
Mela stammered out again, coiling against himself and blushing furiously as sweat beaded on his forehead. Emily started to laugh, in which Mela started laughing as well, holding his hands to his cheeks as the embarrassment washed over him.
I almost shot you.
Emily cried out, walking over towards the lamia and holding open her arms. He laughed again and hugged her, the long snake portions of his body coiling under him with a rush of scale over concrete.
You would have nailed me right between the eyes, I bet.
What are you doing here so late in the day?
Emily asked, pulling away from Mela and looking him up and down. He was wearing more cartoon graphic t-shirts, and his sisters had done up his hair again.
I only just heard you were back,
Mela said, pulling out a tablet from his sling bag.
I've been at work all day. Check out the stuff we're making now.
Emily raised her brows as the bright screen of the tablet nearly blinded her, but saw that his Lamian family was hard at work expanding their tailoring and gear production business.
Are all those rucksacks from the Second World War?
Emily asked, pointing to a picture showing one of his sisters smiling with bright teeth while sewing pockets onto one of said rucksacks. Mela nodded.
Yeah, we kind of fell into a niche making reproduction gear. It's surprisingly popular with both the humans and other races that are studying your culture. Anyway,
Mela said, quickly tucking away the tablet.
I know you're probably tired and I should have gotten here earlier, but I just wanted to say I'm proud of you.
Emily blinked, cocking her head an inch.
Proud of me?
Yes, proud of you,
Mela said, reaching down and taking his hand in hers.
You did it! You faced death and came out on top. I mean, I know you lost some of those who were helping you, and kinda blew up Las Vegas.
I blew up an intersection,
Emily said flatly. and the glare she fixed Mela with instantly made him splutter with nerves.
I didn't mean... You know what I mean.
Mela said, giving Emily's hands a squeeze.
But you saved people. You saved hundreds, if not thousands of people, and got closure for a lot of people who thought their loved ones were gone.
The dusk light hit his face just right, and Emily stared into his glowing obsidian eyes, the sun warming his skin.
You did it, Emily. You're a hero, a real hero. You were brave and courageous and did what you had to do. You kept the friends you could alive. You did your best to bring your people back alive. You're everything we knew you would be.
We?
Emily asked out of actual curiosity, but Mela flushed in his cheeks, his eyes casting down towards their hands.
Well, the hero I knew you were.
Mela said shyly, his face continuing to blush.
If there was anyone I knew I could trust to keep me safe, it would be you, Emily.
Emily's heart hardened as her stomach fluttered. She was conflicted, gazing at the cute, adorable face of Mela and his bright eyes, as while she was flattered. There were those who also trusted her to keep them safe. 2 of them were never coming home to work again. 1 lost a leg and would never fly. 1 had to have his intestines sliced and sewn back together and would likely cause complications down the line. Mela had to know that, right? He had to know that 2 of her group never made it out of that hole alive. Why would he say that he trusts her with his life?
Mela,
Emily said, her lips twisting into a frown. But Mela spoke up before she could.
I know,
Mela said, smiling with his long canines.
I know that others didn't come back, but that doesn't change my answer. You did the best you could do, and you threw yourself into the fray in order to save your friends.
Emily didn't know what to say, but gave Mela's hands a soft squeeze. He squeezed hers back.
I am honored to know you and be your friend, Emily Bronze.
If you kiss him, I will vomit.
The torque murmured into her mind, and Emily's mouth twitched in annoyance. To be fair, the thought did cross her mind. She had almost died who knows how many times, and she wasn't getting any younger. So why not plant a kiss on someone for once?
Blech.
The torque gurgled in her mind, pretending to make retching sounds.
Did I say something wrong, Emily?
Mela asked with a quiver, his smile seeming to slacken.
Have I upset you?
Emily realized she had narrowed her eyes, and that her lips had curled into a half snarl. But she rallied, letting go of Mela's hands and grabbing his chin with the thumb and forefinger of her own. She leaned forward and pressed her lips just at the corner of Mela's own. To give it gravitas, she pressed them there for a solid 2 seconds, then pulled away with a wet smack of flesh leaving flesh.
Thank you, Mela,
Emily said softly, then gave his chin a wiggle.
This hero is tired and wants to go to bed.
Okay.
Mela murmured as the shock washed over him, and Emily noticed the end of his tail was twitching back and forth, much like a cat's.
Good night,
Emily said, gave the lamia a pat on the chest with her hand, then walked back towards the company building, opening the door with a deft pull. When she did, she turned to see Ogledock working the espresso machine, and then shut the door behind her.
You still here, Augie?
Emily asked him, stepping around the end of the counter. Ogledock pulled the steaming mug away, sighing out tiredly.
Yeah, a little while longer. I saw the truck get parked and you talking to Mela, so I made you one too. Here.
Emily once again blinked in surprise as Ogledock held the mug toward her, his own on the counter beside the machine.
You made me a coffee?
Emily asked him, reaching out and taking the mug. Ogledock smiled kindly.
Well, you saved the world. Least I could do.
Don't you fucking do it.
The torque said, and she actually felt the necklace loosen.
Oh, throne, you are. Take me off. Take me off.
The torque openly voiced its guttural disgust as Emily grabbed her mug by the handle,
leaned forward and placed the same kiss to the corner of Ogledok's lips. The changeling rippled with colors as if someone had pressed a finger to an LCD screen, his eyes widening as Emily left her lips in place for not 1, nor 2, but 3 seconds. When Emily pulled away, Ogledok seemed to be frozen, his cheeks and eyes rocketing with spatters of color.
Don't work too late, Augie,
Emily said, turning on her heel and making her way towards her bedroom, leaving Ogledok stunned in the kitchen behind her.
And that's the end of this chapter of Emily Braun's Laments of Blood and Flesh. Please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and comment down below on what you think of the story, the voice acting, all that fun stuff. Comments keep our morale up, you know what I mean? It's a pretty tough time on YouTube right now. Seems no matter what I do, I just cannot get YouTube to like me. I don't know what it is. But if you want to help support the channel and keep this engine running, please stop by the coffee, give $1 if you can. It's more than YouTube's going to give me. Like, I guarantee this video, despite its length, is going to make like $1 because they just don't run ads on me. They don't do it. Or they do run ads and don't pay me, which is even fun. Even more fun, isn't it? There are, however, those who do make it their objective to keep this channel running, and they are absolutely treasured here at Garbro's Field Desk. That's due to Coffee being able to have memberships, which also relate to the Discord to get a rank and all that stuff. And the most generous of these are the first shirts. That'll be Cody Juro, Morgan Morse, Death's Dancer, Dopey X, and Insane Medic. These folks give $50 a month to help keep this channel running, and they're literally carrying us on their backs. Then there's the E4 Mafia with Matty Boy, E Machino, Kiwi Bastard, Airy, Noah Freeman, Flash of Green, Josh Beatty, and Crusader 0625. These guys pay $25 a month, and they really do make up the bulk of the subscriptions. And of course, a big thank you to all of Snuffy Squad who give $5 a month. Really, this helps out immensely with keeping the VAs paid and the channel running, and I cannot thank you enough for just helping. Like, full transparency used to be where YouTube, the money would come in, it would go straight to the VAs, and now it's like I get maybe, because they hold your shit in escrow more or less when you don't get over $100, and I haven't had a YouTube payout in like 4 months, so do the math yourself on that one. So until we see you next time on this side of the veil, that was Eliza, that was Moonmeadow, that was Simba, that was Amanda, that was Annika Storm, our new narrator, that was Fire, that was Hailey, that was Vynn, and that was Danger, our senior female VA, and this is Garbro's Field Desk. We'll see you next time.
Annie, are you fop-headed maggots want to step outside? Step into the square circle? Down, you daft cunt. Help me, I can't stop. It just defaults. I just default in... Oh my god, people default in mortgages. I default into a shoddy southern accent.
Hope Jamesha can make something better. Dude, I can't fucking speak. Holy fucking shit. Man. Блять, иди нахуй.